Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Winters family, welcome to this memorial service celebrating the life of a truly remarkable man, Major Dick Winters. My name is Colonel Cole Kingseed, and I was privileged to serve as a co-author for Dick's wartime memoirs, Beyond Band of Brothers. We have a beautiful service planned for this afternoon, and I know that you're going to enjoy it. But before we begin, I would like to ask something that Dick dearly loved, and that is, will every veteran please stand? I know that Dick would want me to thank each of you for your distinguished service to this great country of ours. And a very special thanks to the members of Easy Company who have come today to honor their wartime commander. You know, most of us remember Dick from his exploits as commander of Easy Company 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment. But today is not a remembrance of the war. You can watch Band of Brothers or Beyond Band of Brothers if that's what you're interested in. Today is more important. Today we celebrate what occurred after the war. One man's lifelong quest for the peace and the quiet for which every soldier yearns. You know, at times like this, it is very easy to slip into melancholy, reflecting upon a life well lived. The public acclaim associated with an award-winning book and a miniseries about one's life. Both the notoriety and the adulation of a grateful public in search of heroes and heroines. But Dick Winters was much more than that. Next to my father, he was the greatest man I ever met. I would have gladly laid down my life for him. He was my friend, and he was my brother. I did not choose to be his friend. He chose and permitted me entrance into a very close circle of friends. And my life was enriched 100-fold because of it. Now, this friendship sometimes got me into trouble. You see, Dick Winters was not only my friend, he was my best friend. And normally a married man selects his spouse to be his best friend. Last year, my wife, Mary, told me that I was her best friend, and I thanked her profusely, but I also knew what the next question was. Am I your best friend? But thinking that honesty was the best policy, and accepting the risk of sleeping alone that night, I responded, Mary, you are my best female friend. Dick Winters is my best friend. You can kind of imagine how that went over. You know, I shared that story with Dick and Ethel last October. Dick grinned, chuckled, and looked Mary straight in the eye, and you know this hand sign, thanks for sharing that with me. So where do we begin this afternoon? In a recent commemoration of the centennial birth of President Ronald Reagan, daughter Patty Davis reflected glowingly of her father, writing, "He was not a perfect man, but he tried to reach higher, to understand what God wanted of him. He was a unique person who carved a unique place in history." So let it be Major Winters. Rather than mourn for him, let us celebrate a remarkable life. So please, join me for an hour and a half of unabashed nostalgia as we remember Dick Winters. And on this occasion, we salute the man, not the rank.
A Bible reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Lo, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable nature must put on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality. It shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy victory? O death, where is thy sting? The word of the Lord. A reading from the Holy Bible, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The word of the Lord.
A poem by James Russell Lowell. As life runs on, the road grows strange with faces new, and near the end, the milestones into headstones change. 'Neath every one, a friend.
A reading from Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time for war and a time for peace. The word of the Lord.
He's the whole world in his hands. He's got 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 the little bits of baby in his hands. He's got the bits of baby in his hands. He's got the little bits of baby in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got you and me, sister, in his hands. He's got you and me, sister, in his hands. He's got you and me, sister, in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got those who can't be with us in his hands. He's got those who can't be with us in his hands. He's got those who can't be with us in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got those who served our country in his hands. He's got those who served our country in his hands. He's got those who served our country in his hands. He's got the whole world 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 in his hands. Amen.
A poem by Longfellow. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great privilege to introduce a number of speakers who would like to share their favorite memories of Dick Winters. And I regret we could not include everybody who wished to speak, because we'd be here probably through the next weekend. But first up is a man that all of you know, although rather indirectly, and that is Eric Jenderson. Eric wrote the Bible for the HBO miniseries, Band of Brothers, and he has a very unique perspective of Dick he would like to share with you.
Good afternoon. I'll be here. My friendship with Richard Winters began with a phone call in 1998. Enthusiastically, I explained that my name was Eric Jenderson and that I was working with Tom Hanks to write and produce Band of Brothers. My specific task at this early stage was to collect all of the materials and to conduct person-to-person interviews necessary to do this thing right. That Tom and Steven Spielberg and I, as at that point their lieutenant, was setting the bar at an almost unreasonable height, that HBO had given us an unprecedented carte blanche, that our intention was to make a miniseries unlike any yet produced, to dramatize what happened in the European theater of operations as it had never been seen. Importantly, at every step of the way, to measure our work against the truth and serve the experiences of the men of Easy Company, of the 506th Regiment, of the 101st Airborne, that I had already spent an afternoon with Carwood Lipton, but I was most anxious to establish a relationship with the commanding officer of Easy Company, and then commence the writing of what's called a Bible for the entire series, that I was poised to jump on a plane and come to Hershey at his earliest convenience. "I see," he said. "How do I know you are who you say you are?" And so from the first moment of our meeting, with his first words after hello, he had me thinking on my feet. I did go to Hershey. I did pass a gauntlet of tests from both Ethel and Winters. For the length, breadth, and scope of our relationship, which would evolve into one of the closest and most profound friendships of my experience, I could never find the wherewithal to call him Dick. And he never once called me Eric. From that first day in his GHQ, his office at the top of the stairs, it was always Jenderson and Winters. His first order of business, after I'd taken a seat in a comfortable chair in the corner behind which he'd stashed his Corcoran jump boots, the ones he'd worn from Toccoa, Georgia to Hitler's Eagle's Nest, his first order of business was to slide across his desk a letter from Shifty Power's daughter regarding one of the few mistakes that Mr. Ambrose had made in his book, but which had cost Shifty a lot of grief and some amount of anguish. Winters' first order of business in discussing what would be a 10-hour miniseries about the men he commanded, sure that an accidental wrong was righted. I think it was another test. He watched me closely as I read that letter. And later that afternoon, he entrusted me, gifted me with 5 carefully bound binders containing all of his notes, thoughts, personal papers, and memories of his experiences in World War II. There was even a frank note taped to an otherwise blank page. It was one that he'd carried with him from England to Germany. And there was more. The publication of Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers had acted as a catalyst and inspired the men of Easy Company to recount, re-remember, and share even more of their memories with each other. And Winters was the nexus for much of that correspondence. And I was the lucky recipient. I went home and got to work, pouring through the material and trying to own the truth, the day-by-day story of Easy Company. Tom and I had divided 13 episodes, which would eventually become 10. And the Bible would be designed as the ultimate reference work for use by myself and eventually Emax Fry, Bruce McKenna, John Orloff, Graham Yost, Eric Bork, and Tom himself. The band of writers. Each of them would forge relationships with the vets who were featured in the episodes they wrote, but the Bible would be the starting point. And for me, I needed to know Winters. And in order for me to know him, he needed to know me. And so over the phone, over the course of nearly 6 months and hundreds of hours on the phone, it happened as Richard Winters and I worked 7 days a week to get the full truth on paper, episode by episode, drafted, fact-checked by Winters, tweaked by Tom, and so the 275-page opus was our collaboration. And for Winters and me, a mutual 6-month intensive therapy session. We were on the every day, early in the morning, right after lunch, late at night. Eventually, I think we talked about everything, and I came to understand what it was about this man that helped win the war. I learned that he had a simple yet profound insight at age 24, that the most efficient and common sense way to get through all that war was, from brutal training to Mickey Mouse bureaucratic nonsense and through harm's way, and all that one couldn't train for, was to pursue excellence in everything he did. Richard Winters made it his personal quest to excel, whether it was in executing the perfect push-up or training himself to run the 3 miles up and 3 miles down that was Toccoa. This pursuit was his private tool, his solution. And it was that solo effort, that obsessive clarity and pure, determined, self-contained purpose that his men had and that caused them to follow when he said simply, "Follow me. Follow me." He took the Fort Benning slogan to heart, "Follow me." Not just through that hedgerow and across that field through enemy fire, but follow my example, follow my commitment. And we'll get through this, and we will succeed. And I sat with him late one night on the phone when he recounted to me the events of October 5th, 1944, on a dike in Holland, when he led a band of brothers against an overwhelming force and fired his last shot in anger. It was a long and profound and emotional conversation, and it led me to understand how Richard Winters had achieved the quality that I had identified in him but had not yet named. I told my wife, Vinnie, that night that I had realized that Richard Winters was the most balanced man I'd ever met. Balanced. This conservative Republican had married an FDR Democrat. And I couldn't help but tease him about his politics. A Republican, yet 2 days after the September 9th, 2001 premiere of Band of Brothers, when we awoke to September 11th, I called him to make sure that he was all right, that Ann and Tim and Ethel were all right. They were. And his singular concern was for the brand of leadership that was resident in the White House on that fateful morning. And we had a remarkable conversation about the choices that would be made from the Oval Office from that day forward. Balanced. After the coalition of the willing invaded Iraq and the conservative voices of the United States were bemoaning France's resistance to joining our forces, he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal and pointed out that we liberated France in 1944 so that they would have the freedom to disagree with us. He was proud of what we accomplished together, so much so that at the Bois de Boulogne, at the closing night celebration dinner for the screening premiere of Band of Brothers on Utah Beach, he and Ethel chose to forego their assigned seats with the executives of HBO and to sit at the writers' table. And when we left that night and navigated our way through the confusion to the parking lot, I'll never and I'll forever cherish the memory of Winters' laughter as I turned to him and Ethel and took advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime and said, "Follow me." Richard Winters changed my life. What we shared over the course of the 3 intensive years that it took for Band of Brothers to go from Bible to script to screen was simply extraordinary. And I will never forget, the one constant, the single detail, the 3 words that I remember when I think of him. It was something that he said every time we spoke, every time we said goodbye. His way of signing off. After every phone call, every fact-checking, soul-searching, put-the-men-first session that we had, "I'll talk to you in the morning," I'd say. "Call you around noon. I'll give you a ring and read to you what I've got. Talk to you tomorrow." His reply was always the same. "I'll be here." Coming from Richard Winters, they were the most reassuring and comforting words any American, any man could want to hear. I'll be here. And he will be. He'll be here. He'll be here. The spirit of Richard Winters and all for which he stood, shoulder to shoulder with the spirit's brothers in arms, will be here among us who remember him. And God willing, here in this country for as long as we remember all of them. Thank you, Ethel. This was a privilege.
And thank you, Eric. Dick's faith and trust in you was well placed. Next up is Bill Jackson. Many of you know, former editor of the Hummelstown Sun and Dick's friend for over a quarter of a century. Bill is also a veteran of the Army's 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Bill?
Thank you, Cole. As he said, I'm past editor of the Sun newspaper, which served Hershey and Hummelstown since 1871. I was editor for 37 of the last 41 years. However, my friendship with Dick Winters came about at least partially because I'm also PFC Jackson, William S., US 52457-193 of the 1st and the 8th Infantry Division. I'm still trying to absorb the loss of Major Dick Winters, a national hero and a man I was proud to call my personal friend. For the benefit of anyone who may have been on another planet, Major Dick Winters served as company commander of Easy Company, commander of the 2nd 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. He became nationally and internationally known following author Steve Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers, which came out in 1992. Dick almost reached rock star status after the 2002 release of the 10-part series Band of Brothers miniseries by HBO, which Eric spoke of so eloquently. The series won Golden Globe Award for Best Miniseries, 6 Emmy Awards, including Best Miniseries, and Dick and Ethel and several of the real members of Easy Company were feted in Hollywood during the award ceremonies. But all the while, he never changed from just being my friend Dick Winters, who lived on Elm Avenue, enjoyed going out to breakfast, and occasionally when I'd stop in, we'd talk the latest goings-on in Hershey and Hummelstown, which always interested him, and our mutual interest in World War II history, mine, which began after February 23rd, 1945, when my dad, also PFC William Jackson, was killed in the Ruhr River crossing in Germany as a member of the 104th Infantry Division Timberwolves. After the Band of Brothers book and the HBO series came out, Dick had a lot of requests to speak. What would he talk about? In his autobiography, Beyond Band of Brothers, The War Memoirs of Major Dick Winters, Dick recalled what Steve Ambrose told him shortly before his death in 2003. From now on, Winters, if you are going to talk about anything, talk about leadership. Did, tempering his remarks for whatever his audience was, whether it be 500 middle school students in Palmyra, 500 cadets at West Point, or the graduating class at the FBI Academy. One of the privileges I enjoyed during this period was being able to accompany Dick to many of his talks. There was myself, Lebanon architect Bob Hoffman, Command Sergeant Major Herm Clemens of the 28th Division, who filled this role, Dick would call us until he was sure he had one of us lined up to accompany him. Our job was to get him there, get him settled in, fend off any overzealous fans, and walk about a half a step ahead of him to his right. The reason for the latter is he was suffering some of the early stages of Parkinson's disease and would sometimes get a little unsteady and wanted to be able to reach out and grab our left shoulder to steady himself. There were never any complaints of this or any of the other infirmities which accompany us all as we age. One of my funny recollections of this period was when we were coming home from one event, and Dick turned to me and he says, "Jackson, I don't know why you mess around with me," apparently feeling he was imposing on my time. I knew this was going to be an important answer, and I thought about it for a few seconds, and then I replied, "Dick, you're my Mickey Mantle." To which he smiled and said, "Okay, I get that." Dick was one of the kindest, most gentle men I've ever known, but he was not without a sense of humor. When Steve Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers, came out, he sent me a copy with a letter enclosed which essentially said, if I thought it was important enough, I might mention something in the Sun. When I later realized that the copy he had given me had the letter in it, but he hadn't signed the book. So I took it with me when I went over one time, and I said, "Dick, would you sign my book?" So he took it from me and he said, "Hey," he says, "this is a first edition, first printing." He says, "This is worth a lot of money." He says, "I'll give you one of these paperbacks." Of course, he was only kidding, and my signed first edition, first printing is one of my most valued possessions. Much later, when I would accompany someone over to his house who wanted to meet him, of course, after clearing it with Dick and Ethel, we would retire to his at-home office up on the second floor for conversation. On one such occasion, when I had brought over Hershey High School history department head Rich McCann and history teacher Alf, we wrapped up our conversation to go downstairs to view the latest footage Dick had received from Steven Spielberg of the interviews with the members of Easy Company. Dick had shown us a lot of his valuable World War II memorabilia, and knowing that I collect same, he said, "I want all three of you to leave this room before I do. Jackson, you first." Dick also had a strange effect on women. I mean, granted, the Frank Sinatra-like adoration he sometimes encountered at his talks and we had to fend off was understandable, but it sometimes showed up when you least expected it. I recall in 2006 when the National Daughters of the American Revolution awarded him their Medal of Honor, the same one they'd previously given to Tom Brokaw and General Westmoreland. He wasn't able to go to Washington to receive it at their entrance, so the national officer in charge of the award came from Texas to Hershey, and with him were the state president of the DAR and the president of the Harrisburg chapter who had nominated him. We had a ceremony. Of course, as usual, Dick charmed all these ladies. And when we were getting ready to leave, the state president and the local president insisted on I taking their pictures with Dick, sitting in his lap. Ethel just shook her head. While Dick and author Stephen Ambrose became best of friends while they worked on the Band of Brothers book, Dick still held him in some awe because of the books he had previously written and given Dick on General Eisenhower and President Nixon. And at some point, Dick had mounted a brass plaque just above the inside of his front door which said, "Steve Ambrose slept here." Dick provided Ambrose with a considerable amount of research material, both on the wartime action of Easy Company, but also on all the men. He kept a file on every man who had served in the company, and later, when the book was done, as well as the HBO miniseries, I was with him when he donated all this material, some 6 file boxes full, to the Military History Institute in Carlisle. I don't quite know how to bring this talk to an end, as all of you already know Dick passed away Sunday, January 2nd, was buried Saturday, January 8th in this family plot in a quiet family-only service, just the way he would wanted it, without any fanfare. So I'll simply say, Godspeed, Dick, and hang tough. I'm sure going to miss you. Thank you.
You know, I can amplify one of Bill's comments about the impact and the effect that Dick Winters had not only on women, but also on young girls. My daughter was only 11 years old when I brought her down to meet Dick and Ethel. And some of us think of Dick as a very, a tough guy, but I'm telling you, my daughter had him in the palm of her hand. She said, Major Winters, if something happens to my dad and my brother and Gramps, I want you to walk me down the aisle someday. So I can understand what he meant. Yeah, next up is Herm Clemens, Sergeant Major, retired, personal friend of Dick and Ethel Winters. And I can say this unabashedly. Dick told me many times that one of his dearest friends in the entire world, and will always be, Sergeant Major Clemens. Herm?
Thank you, and good afternoon. And perhaps Phil gave me a little insight into something that I never was quite sure of when we'd be in the office with Dick. There'd be maybe three of us, Huffman, myself, and him. And it would be time, obviously, for us to move on. And sometimes, most of the time, Phil was going out first, and Dick would look at the two of us and say, frisk 'em. Anyway, my first order of business is to thank Ethel Winters for the opportunity to participate in this last salute. And also thanks for all the times that they showed kindness, love, and their largesse to bestowed family. My prayer for her is that she will find some peace and tranquility because of the interruption of their life and the invasion of their privacy that the national celebrity brought. So I hope that this will bring her that peace and tranquility that she deserves. The man Dick Winters, we all know of his military exploits, but he was no different as a civilian. He had the same values, same character, and it's too bad we couldn't clone him for a lot of leaders these days. But to me, Dick Winters was the epitome of everything good and decent in this troubled world. And aside from my own father, Dick Winters is the man that I admired most, and I loved him like a father. I was fortunate enough to meet him before all the national publicity. The book was on the cusp of being released, and unknown to me, my neighbor at work, at the office, was Beth West. She was a neighbor of Dick's, and she said to me one day, you know, you and Dick would get along fine. She said, they're writing a book about him, and I'd like to introduce you to him out at the farm. So subsequently, that's what happened. We wound up at the farm without any prior appointment or discussion. Dick came out to meet us, and after a polite handshake and an introduction, he invited me into the house. There I met Ethel. And then Dick took me to a little area that he used as his office. And in that office, he was showing me various maps and other items that he used when he dropped into Normandy. After the book was pretty much released and people were starting to read it, he became celebrity. And in the meantime, my wife and I had been invited to an Air National Guard dining out. Along with that request was also a request to ask Dick Winters if he would be the speaker for that particular event. Dick went along, and we had a great evening. And this was the first time that Dick had ever been back to any kind of a military installation or military program. For those who don't know, after his hitch during the Korean War, he came home to the peace and quiet that was alluded to earlier, and he never had any affiliation with the military at all. Subsequently, I took Dick out to the dedication of a tank gunnery range. And a few days after that, we took another group of veterans and we went to watch the A-10 jets do their practicing of strafing and bombing. I knew Dick was hooked, and we were in for a whirlwind ride of this type of thing. It was not unusual for Dick to meet me in the Gap early in the morning and suggest we go for breakfast, which of course I accepted. There were about 40 veterans that had been on that trip, and he asked me, again thinking of others, he asked me to get their names and have them come to a picnic that he would host at the farm. Well, on these trips to the breakfast, the owner of the restaurant found out who Dick really was, and he came over to the table and he said, "You will not pay for anything. I will take care of all this." And Dick, a little bit embarrassed, said, "You know, no, that shouldn't be." But whenever we went in there, if the owner was there, he would not take a penny for whatever we had to eat. Dick couldn't possibly accept all this invitations to speak, but he had a special joy in speaking to soldiers. On several occasions, we had lunch in the 166th Mess Hall. Of course, today the proper name is dining facility. And that was followed by an informal leadership discussion. In the older Army, that would have been considered footlocker counseling and leadership, where there was an exchange between the two. And those young folks, those young NCOs, couldn't have gotten better leadership instruction from any FM, TM, or Army regulation. During one of those visits, a soldier approached Dick and asked him to autograph his duffel bag, which of course Dick did. Coincidentally, the well-worn duffel bag belonged to another Richard Winters, as the faded name was stenciled on the bag. The young soldier was ecstatic. Dick had a wonderful sense of humor, and we shared many belly laughs, a lot of them over military foul-ups. Time doesn't allow for us to share all those times, but it's impossible to share 20 years of friendship and all the special events which we were invited to attend and participate. I will try to quickly mention one funny thing that happened. We occasionally ate at Shoal's restaurant, where such notables as Dick Wheeler, the Marine who was in the platoon that raised the flag on Iwo, and Roy Josh Zerby, who many know, was in F Company of the 101st and was very, very severely injured. The owner, when he found out that Dick was going to the Emmys, brought out a T-shirt for him in a few weeks and handed the T-shirt to him and said, "Dick, when you get out there for those Emmy Awards," he said, "when Tom Hanks is ready to take you up on the stage, I want you to slip this over your tux. And when you get up there, I would like you to turn toward the camera as much as you can so that they can get the slogan that says, 'Dick Winter dined at Shoal's restaurant.'" Believe me, Dick laughed every time that came up. Well, after I retired, we found more time to have lunch together at the little Hershey Cafe, which was only a few blocks from Winter's home. Dick always ordered for us, and it was always the same thing: a tuna melt, cut in half to share, each a cup of soup and a drink. And when lunch was over, he would call the waitress over and he would say to her, "This fellow," and he would point to me, "would like some dessert." Well, I never turned down a dessert, but I didn't ask for one either. But I learned early on that he had a sweet tooth, just like myself. We knew of a special meal that Dick would have liked to have, and it was a little difficult for both he and Ethel to just cook for a small amount of things from day to day. So we invited Dick to our home, along with Brother Bob Huffman, and we had a special meal for Dick that night and special discussion. We had fun, food, and fellowship. And although we would never have the same bond that Easy Company had with Dick, we also had a special bond with Dick Winters, the man. I want to share 2 letters with you that I received for Dick when they were trying to maintain their privacy and changing their box numbers and telephone numbers, and they were being overwhelmed, so some of the mail started coming to me, in which I would open it and take it to Dick. And at this point, I'd like to share the letter with you, because these letters show the profound and positive effect his life had upon people around the world. I'm thankful that God gave us Dick Winters, who in turn gave us all he had for his country and his fellow man. Now allow me to read the first letters from Massachusetts. I just had cataracts removed, so bear with me. As a 31-year-old woman living a pretty life in Boston, I hadn't really ever given serious thought to our military and to the people who have served and who are currently serving. In truth, I was always a little frightened of the whole idea of an army, and even became a little judgmental when it came to the military. It just seemed so far removed from who I am. How wrong I was. Until hearing your story and the story of Easy Company, I never really knew what it meant to say that thousands of people died and fought for my freedom. I think for me and a lot of people like me, it's something you think about on the surface, but you never really think deeply about. My generation has been spoiled. But something clicked inside of me the other day, and I was stunned with the understanding and the gratitude that I could barely contain. I had always just taken my freedom to drive where I laugh, read, have a job, vote, and 100 million other daily activities. It's an overwhelming realization, and one that I'm glad that I finally came to. And for the first time, in Memorial Day 2005, is going to have a very deep meaning to me, and I plan on spending it really thinking about what previous generations gave so that I could live my life. Thank you, Major Winters, for sharing your story with the world. It was tremendously generous of you, and I'm changed for the better knowing about it. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. And now the letter I have, there's a gentleman in the audience, maybe care to stand up or wave his hand, was in Eindhoven as a 9-year-old and watched the Germans leaving and the U.S. forces coming in to chase them out and liberate Holland. Where's Hap? You out there, Hap? There he is. Very modest man. Hap wrote, "Dear Major Winters, having just finished reading The Band of Brothers, I wanted to write to you and say thank you for liberating Eindhoven, Holland, in September of 1944. My family and I can never repay you and your men for saving us from the Nazi occupation. I was the youngest of 6 children in my family and enjoyed running through the streets and celebrating the arrival of your troops and the Canadian forces that had bivouacked behind our house. My memories are of the retreating German forces, some shooting from their trucks as they left, and our cheering for the incoming force, who gave me the first candy bar I ever had, and that candy bar, along with a box of chiclets, were stuffed into my mouth so that I wouldn't have to share them with my siblings. We were lucky enough to be able to immigrate to this country in November of 1948, thereby giving Thanksgiving a very special meaning for us. My lasting reminder of that great time period is my nickname, Happy, given to me by your men on that day. I still go by Hap to this day. Again, my sincerest thank you, Hap. Now, I do have one comment, which I'll pretty much stick to my script here, I'll wonder. It's an emotional me. Dick and I had a real close friendship, as I indicated earlier. I felt more like he was a father to me. But we all know that Dick shunned the word hero. And one day at the Hershey Cafe, we both had a bit of emotion over some things that were happening to our soldiers, and we were mourning the loss of an E Company soldier. With teary eyes, I said to him, Dick, you know I never refer to you as a hero because I understand and respect your concern for those who were lost or crippled in combat. However, the Marine Corps has a saying that heroes are remembered from time to time, but legends last forever. And Dick, you are a legend. With teary eyes, he looked at me and responded, you're something else, fella. So today, we salute a legend. To Dick Winter.
Thank you, Herm, for those wonderful memories. You know, 10 years ago, when I was visiting Dick, he told me, he goes, I have one man whom I want you to meet. He is a close personal friend. That friend is now my friend and fellow veteran, Bob Hoffman.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Ethel, Jill, and Tim for the honor of being here this afternoon. It was an abiding interest in the legacy of our World War II veterans, like my father, that brought Dick Winters into my life 17 years ago, a time before his Band of Brothers fame. A note to him went unanswered for several weeks, then one evening, the phone rang and I heard this ever so familiar voice for the first time. Hoffman, he said, I knew who you were, but I didn't know what kind of a guy you were. So I checked you out. Let's get together. From that time on, I was Hoffman to him and Winters to me. And I'm going to digress for a moment. It was great to see Eric here today. And I never told Eric that I received another phone call one day, and it was Dick, and he said, I'd like you to go to the Hershey Lodge with me. The writer of Band of Brothers is coming in, and I don't know what kind of a guy he is. And Eric, you passed the test with flying colors. Winters was not given to casual friendships or causes, but once engaged, he completely. He lived as Socrates advised, be slow to fall into friendship, but when in, continue firm and constant. I had no idea that summer evening that those few steps to the phone would be the first in a journey of wonderful friendship and incredible adventure. The next decades were filled with trips to the Emmys, world premieres, visits with our president, visits with Steve Ambrose, lectures to the FBI, military groups, and countless schools. And of course, there was the front row seat in the making of Band of Brothers, the series. The strong, humble man I met at the beginning of this journey was, in every way, the same at journey's end. But most special of all were the quiet times we spent talking in his den and eating in his favorite spots. It was on those occasions that the twinkle in his eye prefaced his observations of and advice about life. The same sincere interest and caring nature that characterized his relationships with those he led in war was shared with his close friends in time of peace. Although, as I often chided, his game-faced stare could sear a breach in the armor of a tank, that was not the gaze that his friends saw. I will never forget the lunch when he said, Hoffman, I see you're chairing the United Way campaign again. I'd like to do something for you. Valor Studios would like me to autograph military prints. If you negotiate the arrangements, the Lebanon County United Way, they get the proceeds. That year, a check in the name of Ethel and Dick Winters for $50,000 put the campaign over the $2 million mark. To this day, it is the most. In this, as in all things, he followed his instincts to do the right thing without regard for personal gain. Dick Winters' military leadership skills and tactical genius have been studied and praised by men far more experienced than this old captain of air intelligence could ever muster. But I can tell you today that his commitment and devotion to close friends was every bit as impressive. And then there was the trip to the Emmys. Concern about his health nearly prevented his attendance. With others, I worked to make his involvement possible. He reached out to me to join Ethel and him on the journey for support. When we were arriving at the Philadelphia airport, he looked at me with that wonderful twinkle in his eye, and he said, "Hoffman, if anyone in Hollywood calls you doctor, just go along with it." As I raised my eyebrow, he was quick to add, "Now, I didn't mislead anybody, but if they assume, well, it gets you to be with us." When we arrived at the Peninsula Hotel, I was welcomed by name cards and stationery announcing me to the world as Dr. Robert Hoffman. At a post-Emmy breakfast, Eric Jenderson laughed as he related to me that Tom Hanks had whispered to him that he apparently was the only one who didn't know that this guy Hoffman was an architect and not a cardiologist. I must confess, I had breathed a sigh of relief when I found out that HBO had arranged for medical specialists to be in attendance at the E Company gathering just in case. Yes, Winters made sure, as always, that he had looked out for a friend. Dick Winters, my dear friend, you changed my life forever. Your strength of character, physical prowess, and leadership skills have endeared you to the world as the quintessential citizen soldier. Like the Roman Cincinnatus, you saw your duty, met the challenge, and returned home to find peace. And as I shared with you often, I tell you now again today that your mission to share the story of the American fighting man with generations younger than your own has changed forever the legacy of your beloved Easy Company and all the veterans of every unit and of every war that they represent. In closing, I recount a conversation we had several years ago. At war's end, while hunting in the Alps, Winters had plucked an Edelweiss flower from an Austrian mountain meadow. It was the beginning of a lifelong affection for this little white flower. He had brought it home with him, and he was proud to show it to me. My mother had also loved Edelweiss flowers, and I had designed a cemetery memorial for her, crowned by a beautifully engraved Edelweiss. I shared this design with Winters, and it made a deep impression. Last year, he told me his marker would also be graced by this special flower, and it is. In the Alpine region to this day, the Edelweiss remains the symbol of love, bravery, strength, and dedication. I cannot imagine a more fitting and lasting tribute to the memory of Richard D. Winters. I share a parting prayer penned by Harold Mohn, a distinguished veteran and poet and friend to both me and Winters. Almighty God, into your arms, please take this heroic one, whose work in life and on the earth is at an end and done. Accept him to your kingdom, God, and bid him enter in, where he will find eternal peace and free from strife and sin. Dear God, it was you who gave him breath to see the light of day. Receive him now into your arms, and there forever stay. Winters, my friend, I salute you.
Bob, I'm indebted to Dick Winters for many things, but one of the things which I greatly prize is the friendship that we now share based on that introduction. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is a very familiar face here in the Susquehanna Valley. Dick Hawksworth worked at News 8, WGAL anchor for over 40 years. What many of you do not know is that Dick is a Vietnam era veteran from the United States Air Force. Dick?
Ethel, thank you for this humbling honor. Who are the heroes? When it comes to hero worship, it seems those who are tall enough to dunk a basketball, or can hit a certain number of home runs, or score a touchdown, and then brag about it with a silly dance in the end zone, are often elevated to hero status. But those are synthetic heroes. Among us this afternoon are legitimate American heroes. And I'm talking about the men of Easy Company. I take the liberty of speaking for my fellow post-World War II veterans in saying we are proud and honored to have marched in your footsteps, to have served in your shadows. I salute the men of Easy Company. I'm sure that every veteran in this theater this afternoon is feeling a special bond with Dick Winters, because as Herm Clemens mentioned, if you served, you were special to Dick Winters. Later this year, we will observe the 70th anniversary of America's entry into World War II. It was also 70 years ago that a young Franklin and Marshall College graduate enlisted in the United States Army. Private Richard D. Winters made a pair of decisions that would have a profound impact not only on his life, but the lives of many others. He decided to become an officer and a paratrooper. Dick Winters wanted to be with the best, and when America went to war, it would take her best to win it. A soldier's purpose is to survive, get the job done, and then come home. And when it was over, the warriors came home to raise a family and to work to make this a better country for their children and generations to come. They didn't talk about what they had done over there. There is a feeling among those who served that unless you have been there, you will not understand. But all the world knew what these Americans had done. The men of Easy Company and all the others who served not only helped preserve our freedoms and the American way of life, they helped change the entire world forever. And when you think about it, that was an incredible feat for one generation of Americans to have accomplished. It took almost a half century before Dick Winters and the other members of Easy Company were ready to tell their personal and often painful stories. The vehicle was Stephen Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers. The men of Easy Company opened their hearts about the war as they knew it. We read riveting stories of fear and courage of the men who fought on the front lines. Some of the stories were horrific and heartbreaking. And their stories reminded us of that awful truth, and that is, to win a war, young men must die. War changes a person, each in his own personal way. Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg took Ambrose's book and brought it to life in an outstanding, award-winning miniseries. And from the book and miniseries, there emerged a unique and remarkable man, Dick Winters, a true leader of men. The book, and especially the miniseries, turned Dick Winters, the quiet, reluctant hero, and his men of Easy Company into international celebrities. And despite the recognition, the fame, Dick remained a humble person. He was a plain-spoken man. There was nothing pretentious about Dick Winters. He had a certain grace about him. But make no mistake about it, he was a leader. And speaking as a veteran, I could understand how the men of Easy Company could follow this man into places no man should ever have to go. When you talk about a man's virtues, his courage, his fortitude, his honesty and loyalty, you're talking about a man's character. Character is a person's moral compass. Dick Winters had character that cannot be learned in an Army boot camp or officer candidate school. It comes from within. You either have it or you don't. His character was his strength. It allowed him to say, "Follow me," and the men of Easy Company followed him into some of the most horrible places in some of the most horrible times, and they did so because they trusted him. He had the moral courage that is needed of a leader in the time of war. What makes inexperienced and tearful men go forward into danger? Leadership. He was a leader who treated his soldiers like people, not merely instruments of war. In time of war, men capable of leadership step forward, and those incapable fall by the wayside. Dick Winters was way out in front. Thanks to Ambrose's book and the miniseries, we learned that what the men of Easy Company saw in Dick Winters was a leader who displayed admirable grace and courage and character under crushing strain in the worst of times. He was a commander in action, not just in title. He was willing to take on the awesome and sometimes awful responsibilities of being the one in command. And he never forgot that above all, a soldier was a human being. His sincerity, fairness, and compassion were always evident. Dick Winters was also a man of class. He wore the uniform of his country with class and dignity. In recent years, he favored a navy blue blazer with a personal touch. There was the screaming eagle of the 101st on the breast pocket and his jump wings above the pocket. Not overly done, but done with class. There was also class in his handshake. There was nothing showy about it, no fist bumping, no high fives. His was a gentleman's handshake, a firm but warm handshake, the kind of handshake you get from a man who had proven himself many times over. Dick inspired so many people by being just who he was. He inspired people who knew personally and enjoyed the pleasure of his company, and people who never had that opportunity. He inspired Stephen Ambrose, so much so that when Ambrose was interviewed by TV talk show host Charlie Rose, Rose asked Ambrose if he could have served during World War II, in which unit would he have wanted to serve? And without hesitation, Ambrose replied, Easy Company, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, because of its commander, Dick Winters. Dick Winters' ability to inspire others knew no generation gaps. I take you back to the spring of 2003. The setting is McCaskey High School in Lancaster. That's about a 40-minute drive from here. The event was the annual Distinguished Alumni Awards. I had the honor of being the master of ceremonies for that program. I had done so for a number of years, being a McCaskey graduate myself. There were 5 recipients. I introduced each one with a brief outline of what they had accomplished since graduating from high school. The first 4 honorees told stories about how their McCaskey education helped them become successful in life. The students gave each a polite response. The applause for each was respectable. The last recipient was a member of the class 37. Before I introduced the honoree, I held up the book Band of Brothers, and I told the students, this is not fiction. Everything in this book is true. The events mentioned in this book actually happened to real people. I told them, you will now meet one of the people mentioned in this book. And I also encouraged them to get the book and read it. I then introduced Dick Winters. There was the polite applause. And he walked to the podium with the help of a cane. Now, I must tell you, this program began at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning in an urban high school. Are you getting the picture? Okay. Well, Dick began to talk to the students about freedom, the cost of freedom, and what they are enjoying today was made possible by young Americans who gave their tomorrows. When Dick finished, he turned to walk back to his seat and rejoined Ethel, and suddenly, before Dick could get back to his chair, The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. Every student was standing and applauding this man of generations ago. That response told me these 15, 16, 17-year-olds knew they were in the presence of an extraordinary man, a true American hero. Theirs was the applause of appreciation for what he and his comrades had given them, for what they had inherited. History gives us legends. Dick Winters and his men of Easy Company may not have ever expected to become legendary, but they have. In the hearts of Americans across this great country and freedom-loving peoples around the world. He may have been a long time out of uniform, but Dick Winters still had the heart of a soldier. He was proud to have served his country and proud to have served with Easy Company and proud to have been their commander. When I would leave my visits with Dick and Ethel, I would walk down the walkway from that home on Elm Street, but I would always turn, and there would be Dick standing in the doorway, and he would give me one of these. Do you know what it means to get a Dick Winters salute? Do you know what it means to have a salute a sergeant? I close my remarks with Dick Winters' own words. I was touched by something I read in Dick's book of memoirs, Beyond Band of Brothers, which was co-authored by Colonel Kingseed. Under Reflections, Dick so eloquently wrote these words. I quote, "I wish to convey a final thought, and I hope it doesn't sound out of place, but I would like to share something as I look back on the war. War brings out the worst and the best in people. Wars do not make great men, but they do bring out the great in good men. War is romantic only to those who are far away from the sounds of and turmoil of battle. For those of us who served in Easy Company and for those who served their country in other theaters, we came back as better men and women as a result of being in combat. And most of us would do it again if called upon. But each of us hoped that if we had learned anything from the experience, it is that war is unreal, and we earnestly hoped that it would never happen again. When you leave this beautiful theater, you may find yourself asking, where do we find such men as Dick Winters? I doubt anyone can answer that. But thank God, men such as Dick Winters come forward when our country needs them.
So eloquently spoken as always, Dick. Thank you so much. Well, before I yield the podium, I would like just to share just a few of the memories that I had with Dick. When we would speak, he often would begin his sentences when we were reflecting, as I'm thinking of the time. Well, Dick, now it's my turn. And I'm of the time when I reminisced in a letter in 2005 that our paths certainly could have crossed in 1978 when I drove down Chocolate Avenue on the very first visit to Hershey. In the same letter, I mentioned that not a day goes by that I don't think of you, Dick. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I do know this, that when this old infantryman, referring to myself, goes over that final hill, I expect to meet Dick Winters on the other side. And if I go first, I'll be waiting for you, Dick. I'm thinking of the time on our very last visit to see Dick in October of 2010. While Mary was talking to Ethel, I leaned over and I whispered, Dick, I love you as a brother. You smiled and responded with the final words you ever spoke to me, don't ever change that. Ladies and gentlemen, my fondest memory will always be that I shared memories and Dick shared his memories with me. Dick, you and Ethel opened your home to me and my family on so many occasions. I hope, I sincerely hope, that in some way I have repaid your many kindnesses. It has been my honor and the source of my greatest happiness that we have shared a decade of friendship and brotherhood. Dick, you remain my dearest friend. It seems only appropriate that Dick and Ethel, who brought us here, get the final word today. Dick's wife, Ethel, asked me to say a few words on her behalf today. Dick always loved this theater, and it seemed a perfect place to remember him. Ethel finds it impossible to respond to all those who sent mass cards and condolences. She wants you to know, however, that they were greatly appreciated. She thanks you all so much for coming today, and she apologizes for not being able to speak to each one of you this afternoon. Many thanks are also due to your continued friendship over those last several years and for respecting their privacy at such a difficult time. Finally, she wondered if those of you who had spoken to Dick on the phone ever noticed that he never said goodbye at the end of the conversation. If Dick Winters were here today, this is what he would say. Thanks for coming. I appreciate your support. Don't forget to hang tough. See ya.
Basketball. From the Bryce Jordan Center at Penn State University, high school basketball stars get their chance to compete for the gold. Log on to ntv.com for complete schedules and times. PCN, your source for spring high school sports. The PIAA Basketball Championships, March 25th and 26th, live only on PCN.